But, so we're gonna start now. But
Kyle, where's one?
I said we're gonna start now. I'm just waiting for you to quiet down.
Yeah. Where are you?
We're gonna start on your case. So we're gonna start at the top of this. So, start off at the top of the opponent's case. They say that China needs to restructure its economy, and they say it's really important because they're integrating other countries into the global economy. There are two key problems here. The first is that they don't respond to Anika's second response to their case. This comes from Greer that explains that of the 270 projects that are taking off on the ground right now, they're all geopolitically concentrated on the military, not the economy. That's really problematic at the point where they don't respond to the Sean evidence that says that China's long-term focus is on retaining its control, and the way that it retains its control is through the military. We're saying that they're strengthening their geopolitical foothold because they can scapegoat the economy as a short-term consequence of their expansion. That's really problematic because at the end of the day, they never respond to Greer, who says that there hasn't been a single return on investment on any single BRI project. At that point, even if they increase trade, it doesn't mean there's a return on that trade, it doesn't mean it's sustainable, and it doesn't mean that the developing countries get any benefit from it, which means that even if they're building grids, or they say that they're going to build grids, those countries are the ones that are having a hard time taking off the ground. At that point, they don't see any increase in grids, they don't see any increase in economic benefit. Now, go back onto our case. Where you're going to vote for us in today's round is going to be on our second warrant about green technology. Their only response is that you don't build grids. One, they're not building grids either, because remember, it's only geopolitical strategies and economic projects that are taking off the ground. We tell you that 32% of all projects, or 270, have been canceled. But secondly, we would say that you should prioritize our argument, because you don't need these grids right now. We tell you from Burke and Ellsmore that green technology is getting increasingly cheap, 86% cheaper than it was 10 years ago, and it's now the cheapest source of energy across the world. That's really important because they say that you can't distribute it with a grid. But we're saying that when you implement this technology in the home systems, they're able to store it with a battery. So even when they have blackouts, they still have access to technology, they still have access to electricity. That's really important because this is why you should vote for us. In the status quo, Zhao says that there's been a 3 times increase in the amount of Chinese investment into energy sectors, into coal technology. But they're not making a shift to green technology. That's really problematic because Hilton explains that when they're not making a shift to green technology, they're locking themselves into a carbon-intensive system where you actually see more reliance on coal because their infrastructure is now bound to and dependent on coal, which means in the long term, if they want to shift away, they don't have any capability or political will to shift away to green technology. At that point, we say this is why it's problematic, because Zedek furthers that they will become 50% of global emissions by 2050. They will only contribute to climate change. These developing countries will hurt themselves in the process. How do you weigh this round? First, on time frame. They say that we need to look to the long term, we need adaptability, and we need to develop so that we can solve back for climate change because it's inevitable. One, it's not. Merkel 18 explains that we have till 2030, the time to act is now. But secondly, remember, at the point where it's getting cheaper in the status quo, we say that they can afford the switch to green technology, but when you lock them into carbon-intensive investment, they can't switch away because now they're dependent on coal. But then secondly, we would say that because they're focusing on the long term, they don't focus on solving back for climate change in the short term, which means they miss the brink of 2030, it's only inevitable in their world. But then secondly, on magnitude, we tell you that if you don't negate right now, you will see 250,000 yearly deaths, an increase in conflict by 14%, and you will see more casualties due to poverty increasing by 35%. At that point, it's very clear to weigh these are irreversible impacts and they don't solve them.